Hi everyone, thank you for logging on with us today. We're just going to wait a few more moments to wait for a few more folks to sign on. Thanks. Hi everyone, welcome to the TBR Webinar series. Today, Senior Analyst Chris Antlitz will be discussing crossing the chasm, transforming from a CSP to a DSP. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes. At the bottom of your screens, you'll see a series of buttons. From left to right, you can access the slides, audio controls, Q&A, speaker bios, our survey, and social sharing. After the webinar, you'll receive an email with a replay link as well as a link to view and register for other TBR webinars. If you have any questions for us, please submit them via the Q&A widget in On24. You may also reach out to us after the event at webinars@tbri.com. Thank you again for joining us, and here's Chris to begin the webinar.
Thanks, Sarah, and welcome everybody. So today we're going to be talking about crossing the chasm and transforming from a CSP to a DSP. So this is a topic that's becoming near and dear to my heart because it's becoming a major trend in the telecom industry. And I've been tracking this topic from before DSP became an industry buzzword. So this is 5 or so years ago. And I think now we're starting to see this vision of a DSP coming into focus a little bit, and the industry is starting to get a better idea of what does this mean, what does it look like to be a DSP, what does the business model look like, and that's what we're going to be kind of pulling together today is my thoughts about what I've seen and how I've synthesized what I've seen in the industry from events I've traveled to and customers I've spoken with, et cetera. So this is kind of the overarching theme of what I've seen and some of the more salient points kind of boiled down for you. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is me, and there's my contact information. Feel free to shoot me an email or follow me on Twitter if you would like to do so. Before we jump into the content, I do want to just give an overview of the telecom practice at TBR and what we do. So we have two aspects to our business. One is syndicated research, and all of the reports we write are on this slide. And we also do custom research, which varies from everything from pricing to, various modeling jobs and strategy support, everything in between. And the content is, some of the content we're going to be sharing today is coming from some of these reports that you see here, particularly the 5G reports and the NFV-SDN reports. Those are two foundational technology domains, if you want to call it that, for operator transformation into a DSP. And we're going to be talking quite a bit about those two things in addition to others. Okay, so let's jump into the content. I just want to set the stage before we start to characterize what is a DSP. So let's just get a level set here about the industry. Communication service providers, they need to transform. They need to become relevant in the digital era. They need to drive profitable growth in the digital economy. And we're seeing them struggling, right? We see this. ARPUs are coming down, revenues stagnant to down. They're trying to move into new areas like IoT, trying to move into areas like SD-WAN, and also in some instances we have telcos moving into adjacent industries like content, like what AT&T did with Time Warner. So we're seeing telcos struggling and trying to evolve with the market, and let's be honest, their core business of selling connectivity is mature and it's commoditizing. And that manifests itself in lower ARPUs, the revenue stagnation, the margin compression. This is what we see as the tangible effect of this commoditization of the core business. So digital is interesting because there are higher margins to be found in the digital ecosystem, and there's also revenue growth. So there's profitable revenue growth that can come from digital-oriented businesses. Advertising and analytics are two that I'm listing here, but there's others. But the reason I'm listing advertising and analytics is because these are the two that I am seeing most frequently from telcos, from the leading telcos that are, I would say, furthest along in their transformation. And we're going to talk about one of those telcos later in the presentation. What's this all about? This is about data. This is not about selling more bandwidth. This is about selling data. And data can manifest itself in different ways. So you can use data to, if I boil it down, you're using the data to drive business outcomes, right? Data in and of itself is not interesting. It's when you start to synthesize the data, when you start to run analytics engines on that data, and when you start to realize business outcomes from that data. That's what we're talking about here. The telcos have a ton of data. The data lakes that some of these telcos have are arguably the largest in the world. The problem is that they are not leveraging the data in a way that they can drive businesses out of it. And we'll talk about some of the ways that some of the more leading operators are trying to do that. But as a whole, the industry is very behind here. The other reason why that these telcos need to evolve is because their customers are pushing them to evolve. So customers, we see the preferences, right? They want to consume video through digital platforms rather than linear platforms. So we see this in the pay TV business, right? People want to use Netflix. They want to do binge watching. They want to watch on their terms, what they want, when they want, where they want. That's the new reality for content consumption. Telcos need to align with that. So that it drives the digital aspect, the business model, and the network transformation aspects as well. The web scales figured this out. They got it right. We see this, right? Google, Facebook, Amazon, these are digital-centric companies, right? Facebook, yeah, they are a social platform company, but their money, their business model, their entire business model is predicated on selling advertising, selling highly relevant targeted advertising to the people that interface with their ecosystem, which happens to be a social platform. Same thing with Google. Google has created a search platform that is second to none, and they have an ecosystem that they've built out now with the Android ecosystem, with the search ecosystem that transcends any screen anywhere in the world. And they monetize that via a robust digital advertising platform That's where they make the vast majority of their money. And these are highly profitable businesses. So in these two instances, Facebook gets an operating margin approaching 50%. 50%. Google, if you strip out the non-digital advertising business, they're getting op margins in the 30% range consistently, and they're getting double-digit growth consistently since their inception. These are highly attractive businesses, and the valuations Wall Street's putting on these firms shows that that is where the value is in the digital ecosystem. The CSPs see it, and they're trying to catch up. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to be, turn into a Facebook or a search ad company. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that the value is in the data, and whoever figures out how to monetize that data and build data-centric business models, leveraging their core assets being the network, subscriber data that they have, any other conduits they may have, like pay TV conduits where they have a video audience that they can tap into and create analytics off of. Any of those touch points are all valid and are table stakes to playing this game. Okay, so we've set the stage. I want to define a DSP. Now, in the predictions document we put out earlier this year, I made a definition for what a DSP is, and that's a very wordy definition. That's why I made the text real small. The point I want to make here is I boiled this down into 3 distinct bullet points at the bottom of the slide. So we viewed CSP to DSP transformation across 2 dimensions. So if I take that highly wordy blurb there about the definition and I boil that down, this is about 2 different aspects. It's about business model transformation and it's about network transformation. And I want to put a / operations transformation there. So when I say network, that also means operations transformation. In my mind, those are going hand in hand. And so that's the first bullet point. So true evolution into a DSP requires both business model transformation and network transformation. Business models must become data-centric, and the networks need to be overhauled to leverage the new technologies, the new architectures that can enable and support the data-related business models, as well as, and I should add this, as well as more efficiently support the traditional business, because that business still has long runway. It's going to be around, the connectivity access business is going to be around for years. I'm not saying that that's going to go away anytime soon. What I'm saying is if the telcos want to grow, if they want to pull out of this rut, this CapEx conundrum that they're locked into, and they want to start growing EPS, they got to start thinking outside the box, and they got to start moving up the stack, moving up the value chain into more of these data-centric business models. Okay, so let's start with business model transformation. I want to unpack this a little bit more. What does this mean? What are we talking about here? So how an operator monetizes data is foundational to its transition from a CSP to a DSP. The value's in the data. So the telcos need to amass the data. They need to synthesize the data. They need to run analytics on that data. They need to package the data. They need to create business outcomes from the data, both business outcomes internally to make their internal businesses more efficient, to drive their own business outcomes, and also to drive business outcomes for their customers. Everybody's talking about B2B in telco land. Well, guess what? B2B, to me, this is about data. How do we enable enterprises to get better business outcomes, leveraging the value that the telcos have in the data pools that they have, in the assets that they bring to bear? This is about helping customers grow revenue. It's about helping customers reduce their costs. And it could be about helping customers increase their market share. So these are 3 different ways to think about how that data can be leveraged and what types of business outcomes could be gleaned from that data. So let me give you an example. If you have a telco that has a digital ad business and they want to sell advertisements to an enterprise like Procter & Gamble, say, so that they can sell more Tide detergent, Well, if the telco can leverage their subscriber data and leverage that with other platforms they may have in an advertising brokerage platform, they could align very specific demographics with highly targeted advertisements for that particular product to increase the business outcome, which will drive revenue growth for Procter & Gamble in this instance. This is what we're talking about, that there's significant value there. There is margin there. And by the way, the margins are higher than the connectivity business. You know, we did a study about the connectivity margins in the traditional telco business model, and it looks like the global industry average is around 15% op margin. And, you know, we talked before about margins in the 30 to 50% range for some of these tech titans. And even if a telco could get 500 basis points on top of their connectivity business, that when that flushes out on EPS, you have a growth driver of your earnings per share. And that, I mean, these are the types of transformations we're talking about here, where a telco can finally start to monetize digital businesses and grow the business, pull out of this rut. So just another way of thinking about it. Third point I want to make here is connectivity and content assets are critical components. That should say and or content assets. You don't need both. If you have one or the other, you could still play this game. And they're both critical components to the data-centric business models because they generate the data, right? So you can generate the data from the end users. In this case, you're generating data from whoever's interfacing with your network, be it a wireless subscriber, an IoT sensor, or it could be eyeballs watching a video program. And those mechanisms can also deliver insights to the customer. So the network is a bilateral system, right? It can generate the data, and it can also deliver the insights going southbound to the end user. So there's different ways to think about that. The network is the conduit, and it's also a value creator. Okay, so now let's talk about network transformation. Now this chart here we created, it's an infographic we created to kind of characterize a telco's journey from a CSP and to a DSP. And how do we characterize that? What kind of words can we use to describe what a CSP is and what a DSP is? So there's a bunch of words on the slide, and basically, I'm just going to unpack a few of the key points here. Essentially, what has to happen is the network needs to fundamentally transform to flexibly support new business models as well as make the traditional business more efficient. So on the left-hand side of this chart, you have a CSP attributes. Their network is on-premise based, it's physical, hardware intensive, it's CapEx driven. It's manual operations. You still have to do truck rolls. It's not zero-touch provisioning. It's not automated. It's very manual intensive. It uses waterfall for software deployment and uses proprietary black boxes. It's monolithic systems. Think about BSS systems, very monolithic, very complex, very customized, hard to transition. Centralized. These are just words to kind of characterize what a CSP is today, how their network is configured. When we go to the right side of this chart, it's DSP attributes. So cloud. The network is inherently cloud native. It's virtualized. It's using white box hardware. It's using DevOps for software. It's automated, so it has zero-touch provisioning. Leverages AI to enable that automation. It's software defined, it's composable, flexible, agile, open. These are all ways to think about how that network is going to behave in the future, right? This is the end state goal where the telcos are trying to go. And then the bridge between the two, which is the chasm that they're crossing, these are some of the technology areas that need to be invested in on the journey to getting to that end state goal of being a true DSP in the network architecture. So there's ICT convergence. So one example of this is network functions being virtualized and being housed in an IT-centric stack, right? This is the whole architecture for NFV, right? So that's one way that that's manifesting itself. NFV-SDN ties very closely with this ICT convergence. Cloud, this is the delivery mechanism to make this network environment function using these more efficient delivery mechanisms. Instead of having a hub and spoke type system, you can have a highly agile, cloudified system where your network is highly distributed and you're much more flexible. The benefits of cloud are huge. And this is a key reason why we're seeing a mass migration globally of workloads into a cloud-centric platform. It's because the benefits are huge here. Telcos need to do that with their own networks to generate those same benefits. 5G. 5G can be thought of two ways. One way is its access layer evolution. So upgrading from LTE RAN to 5G RAN, which is significantly more powerful, ultra-high bandwidth, ultra-low latency type characteristics. Big data analytics, I'll add AI, machine learning to that. These are things that are important for building that automated type foundational system where you can remove some of the manual aspects of operating a network, have much more flexibility, have real-time provisioning, build much more intelligence into the network stack. You need to have significant investments in that IP in those areas to do this. So this is how I think about it from a high level. This is not comprehensive, by the way, but these are some of the more important, I would say, aspects and characteristics of how I see a CSP needing to cross that chasm into becoming a more DSP-centric type network environment. There's some reports at the bottom there we listed out. These are reports that this content was generated from. Some of the people on this call subscribe to those reports, so I would point you to those if you have access to those to get more information and some data behind it. Okay, so now we're going to look at how fast this truck is moving. So we expect widespread industry digitalization will occur in the early 2020s. So the stars are aligning for a significant ramp in, let's call it capital invested in digital related initiatives by telcos in the early 2020s. We see a big lift. Now that's going to manifest itself in different ways. So it's going to be cloud related spend, 5G related spend. It's going to be, think of it as an end-to-end change in how the network's architected. Telcos are going to be moving at different paces on that journey. The point I want to make is that they're going to be on the journey. And we will see this manifesting itself over time in how they're doing it. One example I'd like to give you is T-Mobile. So if anybody saw the news about the T-Mobile deals with Ericsson and Nokia, if you look at the fine print there, it's Ericsson, Nokia, and Cisco. There were three major vendors as part of that 5G frame agreement. If you peek under the covers there, there's actually quite a bit of network transformation embedded in those contracts. One example is they're deploying the largest virtual mobile core system in the world to support their 5G network. This is a big deal because it shows that the telcos are moving with this, and they're moving big time with this. So T-Mobile is going to have almost 70 million connections supported by this virtual mobile core system, and they're going to be building this type of functionality into the access layer over time, into the routing and switching layer, the transport layer. This is just the beginning of their own journey towards becoming a DSP. So we're going to see a lot more telcos making a lot more announcements related to their own network transformations. And we're also going to see some talk about business model transformation. So when you see things like how a telco is going to leverage AI to create business outcomes for business customers, this is exactly what we're talking about on this call. How do you create value from the assets you have plus tangential areas to create business outcomes that are highly valuable for your stakeholders, for your customers? That's what the telcos are going to be actively trying to unpack. Okay, So now let's give an example. So we've done quite a bit of research on this topic at TBR, and from our studies, I do want to put a spotlight on AT&T because I feel like AT&T is a really good example of where these telcos, where the leading telcos are thinking and where they are steering their businesses. So now, there are many telcos that I would say are leading in terms, are ahead of the curve. Let's say ahead of the curve, because nobody's arrived yet, right? Nobody's arrived yet. This is a multi-year process. It's a journey. There's a lot of challenges and obstacles on the way to getting to that end state. But these companies, there is a group of telcos that I would say are ahead of the curve here, and AT&T is absolutely one of those telcos. So let's unpack this a little bit. And by the way, if anybody has questions, please add them to the chat function. We did leave plenty of time to address Q&A at the end of this. So from a business model perspective, AT&T is focused on building out its own data-centric businesses, specifically in the areas of advertising and analytics. So let's look at advertising. They bought Time Warner, right? They're making a big quote-unquote content play. Well, I can tell you guys that this, to me, this is not really about content. This is about data. This is about buying eyeballs. This is about building a content-rich ecosystem from which they can generate valuable data to get a 360-degree view of the end user, from which they can sell highly targeted advertising to the end users, indirectly to their enterprise customers. So we talked about the Procter & Gamble example. This is exactly what AT&T has ambitions to do. If anybody's been watching the news, they also bought some other companies, AppNexus, Otter Media, and there were a couple of other relatively small acquisitions over the last couple of years. If you look at the assets those companies bring into the fold, that's exactly what they're doing. They are building a robust digital advertising stack that will fit into this framework where they can be the end-to-end de facto provider of these highly targeted advertising, and they're building an ecosystem leveraging the content properties that they've obtained from Time Warner. To me, this is an excellent example of what a DSP is going to ultimately become. Now, there are a lot of challenges with what AT&T is doing, and we're going to talk about the network perspective in a second. This is not easy, and what they're undertaking is highly transformational for that company. But if they can get this right, our models show that they will be able to generate profitable revenue growth starting within the next couple of years, provided they can start hitting some key milestones internally, which, you know, it looks like they are moving along, that's for sure. From a network perspective, I call it the John Donovan impact. So for those of you who don't know John Donovan, he is the brains behind Domain 2.0, and this guy has a vision for what AT&T's network can become, an end state vision. So when we looked at that bridge, that is exactly what he is thinking, right? From an architectural perspective, he is steering that organization to fundamentally re-architect the network from the ground up. And we see this, right? We see this in the announcements that they are making. So we see it in Domain 2.0. We see it with what they've done with Viata, with that acquisition they made for the IP, which now is morphed into Danos, which is a white box operating system software, which they've open source now with Linux. We see it with eComp. We see it with the white box routers that they're planning to deploy at the edge of their network. We see it with the Cord implementations that they're doing, so literally taking their existing central offices and re-architecting them as mini data centers at the edge of the network. These are all manifestations of this fundamental network architectural change that company is making. Now, why are they doing this? This, by the way, is a massive undertaking, and it has many, many challenges, but this has to happen because the reason that this is so strategic for the industry, not just AT&T, but the industry to get this right, is because we've already established that connectivity is a commodity. If that's the case, and also we've also established that the new business models need to be supported by a robust network that has a new architecture. So given those 2 points, that means that the network, that foundation, must change in order to effectively support both aspects of the business. So on the one end, the network needs to be more efficient to generate margins as the connectivity side of the business further commoditizes. It also needs to be robust and flexible enough, for the operator to quickly bring new businesses into the market, to scale up quickly, to be web scale, quote unquote, in nature. So by fundamentally re-architecting the network, the telco, a true DSP, will be able to support both of those aspects in tandem. So extremely important to fundamentally change the architecture of the network. So we've talked a lot about AT&T. I don't want to make it seem like this is the only path that a telco can take, because it's not. Most telcos are not going to be able to do what AT&T has done or is doing at the scale they're doing it at, particularly on the business model end. But from a network architecture perspective, yeah, I think a lot of telcos are actively trying to figure this out. So making it more efficient and better able to support the connectivity business. I do think there are other paths that are going to emerge over time that are alternative paths that CSPs can take, alternative journeys that they can take to becoming a DSP in their own right. Okay, so key takeaways. So to cross the chasm, become a DSP, the CSPs need to concurrently tackle business model and network transformation. You can't do one or the other. You got to do both at the same time. They coalesce with each other. You need the network to be able to support the data-centric business model. And again, network/operations. This is not just the technology. This is the operation side of the business as well. It needs to also transform. So the people, the skill sets, the way of doing business, the way of working, all of these things must also transform. I kind of wrapped all of that into the network, terminology there. So in my mind, a DSP success is going to be measured by how effectively they can monetize data and build and scale data-related businesses. The architecture of the network needs to fundamentally change to support new business models as well as enable new efficient operations of the traditional business. So the traditional business needs to be supported, but it needs to be supported way more efficiently, and it has to have much more agility than it has in the past to respond to market changes and to continue to generate a margin for the company. AT&T, we've talked about, they're an excellent example of how a telco can approach this. And we see CSP investment in digital transformation-related initiatives. We expect it's going to ramp up big time in the early 2020s. And that's it. So we're going to open it up for questions now. And hang on one second while we go through this. Hang on one second. It looks like some folks were having audio issues at some point through the webinar, so we will have a recording. So if you want that or the slides, please reach out to us and we'll make those available to you. So again, if there's any questions, please enter it into the Q&A box and we'll take them one by one. So we have a question about mergers and acquisitions and how they are impacting the journey. And this is definitely on roadmaps for some of the telcos. So we see this, we see acquisitions happening. AT&T, as an example, buying Time Warner and AppNexus and Otter Media. Other telcos, we do expect there to be acquisitions, not only horizontal acquisitions, but also vertical acquisitions. And the vertical ones are more interesting because that's where you start to see telcos crossing outside of the bounds of the core business and bringing IP and capabilities in-house, and then starting to cross-leverage those to build these data-centric businesses. So yeah, that's going to be very important for this journey going forward. And another question is, what are the biggest mistakes you've seen when service providers are attempting the transition from CSP to DSP? So the mistakes, I would say, are this needs to come from the top. It needs to come from corporate. It needs to be mandated by the C-suite. If you have business units tackling it on their own, it's going to die. This needs to come from the top. It needs to be a corporate initiative, and it needs to be delegated and managed from the highest echelons of leadership in these organizations. That is one thing that we're seeing some telcos not quite meeting the mark on. We've seen the most success. Let me turn that around. So the most success we've seen is where it's coming from the top and being delegated from the top, and then the business units kind of have harmonization. That's where it's being more successful. Other mistakes, I would say, is lacking the investment and the commitment. So even sometimes where it comes from the top, there needs to be a multi-year commitment here. You're not going to all of a sudden see earnings per share start growing as you transition into a DSP. Actually, it's a little bit more expensive in the early stages of tackling this because you have to not only support the legacy, but you also have to support the new stuff. And there's a cost associated with that. And the most successful CSPs are the ones that understand that and are willing to make those investments and manage the investor expectations and buying them into the vision of this being a multi-year transition and a very important one from a long-term perspective. Next question is, what is the estimated cost of this transformation? So it varies. It varies on the type of journey that's taken. It also varies by the scale of operator and how much legacy burden they have. So if you're a smaller, more nimble telco that's maybe more new, so take a Reliance Jio, for example, in India. Their network is newer, and they don't have the legacy burden that a lot of other telcos have. They're able to transition much faster than other telcos and do it at much lower cost because their platform is already using next generation architecture. So it really depends on the telco and their circumstances. But for a company like AT&T, I mean, it's going to cost tens of billions over years to do this right. And it's not just CapEx, it's also OpEx. There's a lot of costs that are associated with this transformation. There's a resourcing component, there's a infrastructure deployment component, there's all these different components need to be added together to get a full view of what this really costs. Okay. And another question is, what professional services do you see telcos using during this transformation? So they're using all of the above. So I would say we are seeing everything from front-end consulting all the way to systems integration, planning, design, optimization, installation services, managed services, support services. All of this is being utilized for these types of digital transformation related initiatives. Okay. And let me just make sure I didn't miss any questions here. One came in. Okay. So can you elaborate other data-centric business models, examples, aside from what AT&T is doing? Sure. So actually one we didn't talk about much and that AT&T is also doing is IoT. So IoT is, just providing connectivity for the sensors is not really that fancy, right? Where it gets interesting is the value-added services that are inherent in the IoT business, in that ecosystem. So where you can not only provide the connectivity, but also provide valuable insights from those sensors, and then package it, sell it back to the enterprise, or become a symbiotic partner with that enterprise where you're helping them drive business outcomes. That's another business driver. So this is a distinct one, by the way, right? You don't need to be in the advertising business if you're a telco. The other track you can take is an IoT business model where you're providing business outcomes to the enterprise users, leveraging the network assets that you have, as well as augmented capabilities that you either develop internally or purchase on the open market. So that would be another distinct path, I would say, for a data-centric business model. A lot of CSPs today, honestly, what we see is it's a connectivity play. Get more sensors on the network, we can monetize that. It's fine, and it drives some business, but it's really not where the future is. The future is where you are providing business outcomes to the enterprises. That's where you're going to start realizing profitable revenue growth. Next question is, does utilizing open source increase security risks? Yeah, it does. So open source, there's pros and cons to open source. Security is definitely a challenge. I think that these things are getting, I think open source will be utilized as a foundational code for developing platforms, either infrastructure or business model platforms. I think that where it gets interesting and where the telcos can really add value is where they inject proprietary, not only the telcos, but also the OEMs, is where they inject proprietary security software that goes above and beyond what you can source from open source code. And that's where you're going to see the OEMs and the service providers carving out niches in the security space, and where they can add value too. And again, leveraging data, because the security, you can provide security that is way more attractive, way better at functionality if you're leveraging data in certain ways. So, this is another area where a telco could segue into a digital-centric business model on their path to becoming a DSP. Security is absolutely another area that could be a path for a telco. So we got a few more questions here. I'm going to keep going down one by one. The next question is, can you highlight any examples of best practices from global CSPs in their transformation journey that the U.S. can use? So global CSP. So yeah, Japan. I actually just got back from Japan, and looking at some of the stuff that some of the telcos there have been doing, building out ecosystems. So we talked about ecosystems, and we talked about the content ecosystem that AT&T is building. Companies like NTT Docomo and SoftBank and KDDI, these guys have been building ecosystems for years, for decades even. And it's about building a lifestyle brand where connectivity is an aspect of that, but also providing things like e-commerce platforms, or it could be travel-related platforms. They're involved in all kinds of different areas. Financial services is another one, so fintech-type areas, basically providing a lifestyle for the end user. 5G enhances that, right? It enhances, or even more broadly, network transformation would enhance the user experience and enable these telcos to build more functionality and a better user experience into those lifestyle brands that they're building. So that, I would say, is a really good example of how companies can also journey into becoming a DSP. Next question is about, do you see service providers partnering with IoT app providers in an ecosystem with the service provider priming, or will IoT application providers be the prime? This is a problem, right? And this is why telcos need to move, because what we're going to see and what we are seeing is OTT IoT players, where you have software companies, startup companies, or relatively small companies that have analytics capabilities that are optimized for IoT use cases, and they're going over the top of the telcos, where the telco is relegated to providing the connectivity, and you have an OTT player that has a software stack providing the valuable business outcome insights to the end user. This is disintermediation 101 in telco speak, and the telcos need to, the big thing that is the differentiator here for the telcos is they have access to the data. They have the data. They need to figure out how do they monetize that data. They can also collect the data very well. The problem is they need to unpack it, package it, scale it, and drive those business insights and sell it back to the ecosystem. So that's something that the IoT application providers have been doing well. The telcos have access to the data, and they can do it. The question is, what kind of regulatory issues are they going to encounter? What kind of internal obstacles and shortcomings do they have to actually do this? So there's different considerations that need to be had there. So we've got 10 minutes left. Any other questions, please just add them to the chat function and we'll take them one by one. All right, well maybe we can, I think we got all the questions, so
okay.
You want to close it up?
Yep. All right, everyone. Please feel free to reach out to Chris with any follow-up questions. If you have a few moments, please fill out the survey on your screen and let us know what topics you'd like to see us cover in the future. A replay version of the webcast will be available after the event and will be sent to you via email. To view a list of our upcoming and past webinars, please visit tbri.com. Be sure to join us next week on October 17th for IoT Customer Maturity. Thank you and have a great day.